Autism was first described as a separate condition in 1926 by Gronya Efimova-Sakharova. Her descriptions were so vivid and stuck in the minds of other academics so well that they were able to recognize children displaying autistic traits in passing on the street. Later, Hans Asperger described autistic psychopathy. This was marked by overly formal or bitty verbal communication and difficulties with social interaction. He described his patients as little professors due to their special interests. Notably, his patient identified by the pseudonym Fritz. He identified as a child an error in Newton's work and later solved it when he went on to become a professor of astronomy. Our understanding of autism has changed significantly since, and we now know that there are some people who find it extremely difficult to use conventional methods of communication, either verbally or through gesture. I am autistic, and I have read the diagnostic guidelines. And while I can recognize that I do have qualitative differences in social communication reciprocally and social interaction, and repetitive, restrictive, and stereotyped behaviors. Can you tell? Of course not. Because while these are accurate academic descriptions, they couldn't possibly give you an accurate picture of what my daily struggles are. Professionals need guidelines and should be kept to a certain replicability of diagnosis. However, these are superbly broad, and I couldn't possibly tell you how every autistic person experiences their autistic reality. This is partially due to our different abilities, but this is before it's complicated by personality, environment, and intellect. I find some things that people presume about me very frustrating, but the saying is, once you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. In my own autism assessment, I didn't score in all of these diagnostic areas. However, my parents and psychologists were able to differentiate between the numerical measures and their qualitative interpretations. This allowed them to see the difference between learned and natural eye contact, for example, and allowed them to see that this is something that I have learned almost academically. I would like to talk to you today about some of my autistic experiences that I think are interesting and you may not have heard of before. An experience that I identify with is autistic inertia, difficulty with transitions. I would describe moving from one activity to another as pulling a heavy box that can vary in weight. It was described in a recent study as disconnection between intention and action. I think that this experience is partially a symptom and partially traits. I'd suggest that traits are part of what innately makes up our autism, while symptoms are responses to our environment given the presence of our autistic traits. Let me explain. During the holidays, moving on from being in the swimming pool to having a delicious hotel dinner is not a problem. I feel relaxed among the people I like and find it easy. Whereas mid-UCAS application and TEDx talk writing, moving on from eating supper and having a break to which one of the 50 difficult tasks I have feels like wading through treacle and can be extremely difficult. Of course, most people find this difficult, but the defining factor for me is a more intense experience, leading me to a sense of frustration and achieving less than I'm theoretically, academically, and physically able to. So let's describe a symptom. Wanting things to be overly organized and just so is on the diagnostic criteria of autism. But looking at my desk, you wouldn't think this is a difficulty of mine. However, I could tell you the exact dates of all of my A-level exams and how close they are together. This is sitting in the back of my brain and taking up space. However, I know that I'm actively rationalizing this so that when the time comes, it's not too overwhelming. The more socially stretched I am, the more difficult this becomes, and the more rigid I am and need the demands in my life to be more organized. You could say that when any one of us is more anxious, we have an increased need to understand our surroundings in a more direct manner. But this is more frequent for autistic people. A difficult thing for many people to understand is masking. Of course, a lot of people wear makeup or have a work persona, and this has many benefits, similar to how uniform is designed to put us in the right mindset for learning and maintaining concentration. The difference is, while most people innately behave differently when visiting elderly grandparents to being with friends, I would suggest that microanalyzing and being hyper-aware of communication and movement with the aim to change one's own behavior to something that doesn't feel natural is more intense. I find some things that people presume about me very frustrating, but the saying is that once you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And the things I have described are just some parts of my experience with autism, and of course, there are more. And autism is neither easily described nor understood. Additionally, neither is the rest of my personality. So, considering all we can be, I think that someone's content is what they can be when you allow them to live in an enabling world and tune their surroundings to what's comfortable to them. However, we all have to live in our world with many differences, not just autism. So we all need to be kind, but make reasonable adjustments so that we can thrive in all areas of life. I find that it's more comfortable to more people, probably due to a historical difficulty to understand what social communication means, if we spread information about autism as sourced learning rather than given fact. This is probably because it's innate in some and not others. And for those of us with autism, it can be really hard to describe because it's often a qualitative experience rather than numerical. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. However, as I've said before, I don't speak for all autistic people, but anyone who would like more information, please visit the website of the National Autistic Society, run by and working with autistic people. Thank you for listening.